Hello and welcome to the Holly Bridges podcast. Some time since I've done one. I'm very excited today to introduce my guest, Marcie Ciampi, aka Samantha Craft, which is her pen name. Marcie is best known for her blog and book Everyday Aspergers, and also for her Females with Asperger's Syndrome checklist. Marcie is also co-contributor to the book Spectrum Women, Walking the Beat of Autism, written by women on the spectrum. As well, Marcie has a master's degree in education and is a recruiting coordinator and manager for Ultra Testing, a software company who focus on hiring neurodivergent individuals. Marcie has a strong focus on bringing neurodivergent individuals together, building community that thrives on celebrating the enhanced mind that is autism. What I love about her work is its grace, compassion and authenticity in an autism world that can be too clinical and or at times rather angry. What I see is that Marcie brings a new way forward and offers a strong voice in the autism community. So I'm really, really excited to meet her for the first time and to welcome her on the podcast. Welcome, Marcie.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate you setting aside this time to meet with me, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thanks for being here. So I thought perhaps what we might do to start with is get you to explain what the term neurodivergent means, because a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with it.
Well, it's interesting you asked that. I was just reading one of many numerous articles I've read about neurodiversity. I've read hundreds of hours on the topic of neurodiversity. And it is changing, it is differing. I interviewed the actual founder of the name, I guess who coined the name, Judy Singer, well over a year ago. That's on my website. So I was able to learn a lot about the origins of the word and how that movement began and its roots. But more recently, to me, neurodivergency or neurodivergent, being neurodivergent means that my brain, my neurology might work a little differently than the typical person, but that those differences don't make me any less than or greater than. And the neurodiversity movement is about celebrating those strengths that come with different ways of perceiving and processing and viewing and communicating in this world, and celebrating unique differences and gifts and skills and talents. And it comes with it as well an announcement that we are a minority that has been suppressed in the past and not given a voice. It's time that we rise up as neurodivergent individuals and speak what it's like to be neurodivergent from our own experience, not from someone who's not neurodivergent. Those are two elements that come to mind. And then as far as a broad general diagnosis, or not diagnosis, definition, I would say that it is a way of perceiving and processing the world with brain variances that is not meant to lessen or demean someone, but to let other people know that there are different ways of being and existing in this world, and that's okay. And under the umbrella of neurodiversity would fall many different branches, and that's what's always changing, from being on the autism spectrum, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, ADHD, and now coming into the mix are people who are suggesting even brain injuries, mood disorders. Post-traumatic stress would fall under the mood disorder. So anything that makes the brain function a little atypical. And interestingly enough, the more we broaden the neurodiversity definition, the more it becomes a majority and not a minority anymore. So there is that fine line of when is it becoming so broad that it's not highlighting the differences and the gifts and the challenges that come with that. So I think that answers the question.
Beautifully. I might come back to a few parts of that later, but I thought what might be nice is if you can talk about your mentoring program a little bit, because that follows really nicely in from what you've been talking about, and just why it's important to have mentors for especially women on the spectrum, but not only, from people who are neurodivergent and why that's important.
Sure. When I started my blog I think it's been over 6 years ago now, it became well known, and I had more and more individuals, mostly those who identified with being female, contacting me about where can I go for support, what do I do now. And so originally I started a Facebook group that I eventually, after a year, handed over to 6 Autistics to run, so I'm no longer a part of it. But I founded a face group, support group, so people would have a place to connect. And then in the last 5-6 years, I've been answering emails and Facebook messages and blog messages almost daily from thousands of people over the world, and seeing repeatedly that need for support. I try to mentor as best I can by providing a listening ear and the experience of, from my perspective, of what it's like to be a woman on the autism spectrum and be the parent of a grown child on the autism spectrum. And I was in a partnership with a gentleman who was on the autism spectrum for many years. So I'd bring all that in and try to be a listening ear that has experienced and walked in those shoes, and providing some of the skills and tools and techniques I've developed for my own self to help me with my self-worth, my self-acceptance, my self-advocacy and such. I was going to launch a business with mentoring, peer mentoring, and I actually changed my mind. It was really hard to, part of it is because it's just really hard to charge anyone for me for that service. When someone asks me a question or emails me or messages me, I like to be able to respond to them and be there and not set an appointment. And part of it too is it's just not where my path is leading me right now. I'd rather continue doing what I've been doing at the same level. I don't know if this is getting off track, but for me personally, I want to be able to provide that as more of a community service and not as a fee-oriented service. Mm-hmm. So it's volunteer time for me that I offer a listening ear.
Right, okay. And so can you describe how you see, because it is, but how you see it's beneficial for the people that you service, and why it's missing in the ordinary world for them?
Well, for example, I had a session with a gentleman off an island of Greece, and we only spoke for about 30 minutes. We had an online Skype session, and he said it was so helpful to have someone listening to him who understood what it was like to have an autistic brain and to think like an autistic person and automatically have that empathy and understanding of where he's at, and also to understand his thinking process and the way his mind works. For example, he's very good at branching off fluid intelligence and finding lots of interconnections. And so by listening to him, since he was autistic and I was autistic, I was able to point out many strengths that he had that he didn't necessarily see or understand, because I've got a trained eye to find those now after many years. And also there was this unconditional acceptance. He didn't have to put up an act or follow any social rules or worry that I wasn't perceiving him accurately or judging him. And so there was this freedom for him and for me as well. It works two ways: to be ourselves and to gain value from the relationship without the anxiety that the typical world often brings to those of us on the autism spectrum. Sorry,
I was totally lost in what you were saying.
That's okay.
I'm
trying not to go off on tangents. I usually go off on tangents and talk for 20 minutes straight, so I think I'm doing pretty well.
Very well. Oh, it's lovely. I was thinking while you're talking, it's one of the things I like most about my job as well, my work with people, is because you spend time in that space and it's not organized and it's just fluid, and it's as much a pleasure for me as it is hopefully for the people that I spend time with. And it's that, and it's not it's not coercive, and it's not trying to turn someone into something. And that's what I find so much with for the last 100 years or whatever, what we've done with autism is trying to peg people, and it doesn't work. And there's so much beauty to have when you let people fly and you validate their wonderful ways of thinking. And they're so diverse. No two people are the same. The ability to
But there are definitely similar characteristics and patterns and similar experiences with anxiety and self-esteem and bullying and trying to fit in and being misunderstood and misinterpreted. So while each autistic is completely unique, like every other human being on the planet, we also do share a commonality of our minority and our minority experience. And to know that someone else understands where you've been and can really listen and hear you, and that you can be seen, is a value and a goal of almost every human being, is to be seen and heard and understood. And that's very much lacking in the autistic community, even amongst autistics themselves. Some who argue amongst themselves and point fingers and blame and the proper terminology and the groups you should support and shouldn't support and what you should say and shouldn't say and what you should share and shouldn't share. And so the autistic is not only sometimes ostracized and bullied outside in the typical world, it also happens internally in the autism communities. And so I really strive to promote and foster a positive environment and not instill judgment or my goals or my mission onto other people. My goal and my mission is up to me, not up to other people. And I really stand by everyone's right to self-identify how they choose to be, what they choose to call themselves. And I steer away from autistic groups that, or agencies and organizations, and there's some larger ones that call other autistics out publicly and humiliate and shame. And that's where I stand by with my values. That's where I cross the line. So eliminating some of that ostracization or alienation, I guess it's an easier word to say, is one of the things I really hope to bring into the communities. And I don't see myself as the person doing that as much as being an example so that other people can go out and do that themselves.
It's quite a unique role because it requires you to be quite a good sort of still rod, but then be very allowing. And it's inverse to how we normally do things, but I think it's the way of the future in lots of ways. Can you talk a bit about how you came to be doing this work, and so how you're very open and quite courageous in your writing and generous, I think, and vulnerable. And so I'm curious if you could sort of talk about how you came to be doing this work, and also how you came to write your Asperger female checklist, because it's fantastic.
Sure. My mind is going in 1,000 different directions because I could probably talk to you for several hours about this topic. So try to touch on the main points. One is that I felt called to write my life story before my first son was ever born, and he's 22 now. I had this calling and this eternal pull inside of me, which grew stronger and stronger. And over a decade ago, I spent every day of the year, except for one day, writing, because I felt that that was what I was supposed to do. And at that time, I wasn't diagnosed with autism or any other neurological difference. And I didn't know why I was writing, because I was just some retired school teacher raising 3 children and, living in suburbia. And there was nothing in my story that would ever attract anyone's attention. Or to me, at the time, it didn't feel like worthy. Why was I doing this? But I felt called to do it. And so I actually wrote every day for the first year, and it was terrible. I didn't know how to write, but I felt called to do it. So I did it. And I really encourage people to follow that inner calling and that intuition and that inner voice. And so the second year I spent redrafting it and rewriting it. And what was interesting is the first year, there was a lot of sadness and mourning and hurt. And as I was writing out these life experiences. And then the second year, there was a lot of anger and upset and how dare this and how dare that. And then the third year, I chose to rewrite more. It was about forgiveness and letting go. And so by the time I started writing online, I had already spent several years processing myself, but as a person without autism. So what was interesting is when I started my blog, I was writing as an autistic, but yet I had these hundreds of pages as a non-autistic that I thought I was. And so I was able to blend the two. And what's interesting about the biographical stories that take place before the blog began is they're written from the perspective of someone who didn't know they were on the spectrum, but yet they're still a life story. So I don't know if anyone's ever done that before, where it's actually a life story of an autistic written before they knew they were autistic. So that's one element. The second is, so that was why I was called to write an autobiography, a memoir. But why I was called to write my blog was a completely different situation. I was at university. I have a master's in education, and I was always drawn to counseling and therapy and mental health. Since I was a little girl, my mom worked for the prominent Virginia Satir, who is a social worker well known in the USA, actually one of Wayne Dyer's mentors. And always since then, my mom worked with her. I wanted to get into counseling. And so I started a master's program right before I started my blog. And this was about 2011, 2012. And at that time, I realized that I was on the spectrum. My son was in counseling, and I had asked his therapist if she thought I might be on the spectrum, and she said, "You most definitely." And so then I sought out an official diagnosis from a psychologist. And what called me to write the blog is there wasn't a lot of information out there. There were a few great books out there pretending to be normal and Aspergers. I'm sure most of us have heard of those, but there wasn't a lot of other things I was finding. And I was so confused and lost that I started to write to process those feelings. And what really, I'd say, bled the blog, just made it bleed and just take off for me internally, what pumped the blood in me was when I was at university, I confided in the head of the department of psychology that my therapist had said that I more than likely had Asperger's syndrome, and she thought it was a good idea for someone wanting to be a counselor or a therapist to let them know. And he proceeded for about 5 to 10 minutes to shame me about having disclosed that I was possibly someone with Asperger's. And I talk a little bit about that in my book, that I was inventing it so that I could be closer to my son, that my family's dynamics had created it, that was I happy I was announcing to the world that my brain and my son's brain were broken, etc. And so this was a devastating moment in my life that will forever be etched in my brain and probably my genetic structure and generations after me. But what it did, besides give me post-traumatic stress, was propel me into pouring my heart and soul out to figuring out why was Asperger's or now autism, why is this something that I was to be ashamed of and hide and not talk about? And why was so little known by these professionals, the heads of departments, the psychiatrists, psychologists, who were, as I found out through research and through communications, misdiagnosing women left and right, or missing them or overlooking them, and causing this horrible pain of not being seen, not being recognized, or worse, being misdiagnosed with a condition that they didn't have and being treated for that condition. And so I had this huge compassion for not only what I had gone through, but this expansive empathy for wanting to help other people who'd gone through that and to prevent it from happening to other people, and to say, you know what, that wasn't okay. That wasn't okay what happened to me. And if I can make a difference in just one person's life so that doesn't happen to them, then so be it. And what was interesting about the blogging experience is the first year was terrifying. And I had some pretty esteem issues back then. And, every comment I got, I would just take it to heart. And it was very much an ego-centered process at that time. And it turned out to be this magnificent, wonderful spiritual journey where I was chiseled and chiseled and chiseled until most of that ego reaction was just gone. And if someone gives me a what you would call positive comment versus negative comment now, they feel the same. It's just somebody giving their feedback and their perspective. And so I not only grew as an autistic woman, more able to understand myself, my son, my friends, my growing circle of community, but I became a woman who was actually very well centered and confident in herself. And for the first time, able to be okay with how other people viewed me. So it was this healing journey from all different directions that you can't put a price on that. And to date, I have not made any money from the book. I put out a big investment at the start, and everything I've done to date has been free minus a couple conference appearances. And it just keeps coming back. I really believe that if you follow your heart and your intention is from love and service and connection, that it just comes back to you tenfold, 100-fold. I'd say, in my case, 10,000-fold. So it's just been this beautiful process. Hard the first year or two. And since it's just continually a flower that's continually blossoming and new colors, new experiences.
It sounds really alchemical. It's fascinating listening to you because there's such power and beauty and empathy in the way that you speak and you respond to the world. And it's not easy, but that is driven, you're driven by it, I guess, and you grow it. But it's really interesting that people remark so often with empathy with people on the spectrum, isn't it? Because, and if you wanted to talk about that a bit, I'd really like it, because it's such a standard thing people say. Yet when you meet people and get to know them and they feel safe with you, they are actually more widely universally empathetic than most human beings, in my opinion. So expand on that a little bit.
Sure. So I have corresponded with over 10,000 autistics around the globe. And, I haven't done the mathematics, but I'd probably say there was 3 that maybe didn't display empathy. And I think if you surveyed 10,000 people that were not autistic, there'd probably be more. And who's to say that they were even diagnosed correctly? They could have been misdiagnosed and actually been sociopath or something. And so I can say from anecdotal experience that it's a huge myth. It's also been proven through studies. I think it came out about 2 years ago, and my working memory is not so great. So I'm a much better writer than a speaker because I can never remember anything. Shouldn't say anything, but I can't remember a lot of facts and dates and things. And a study came out where they were under, I believe it was an MRI machine, and they held the hand of the autistic individual and measured their empathy levels, and there was found to be no difference at all. So it's actually been scientifically proven. It is this huge stereotype and huge myth, and it gets entangled with our ability levels to process emotions and process our experience and to explain what those emotions are. And it gets entangled with our social ability to say the right words, what other people want to hear. And I have a short chapter in my book about it. And basically the conclusion I came to myself was what people say is empathy a lot of times isn't. It's a lot of just, well, they said it. They did it. But how do we really know if they're feeling it? And I've seen so many people off the spectrum, non-autistics, who feign empathy, who say, oh, it's going to be okay, don't worry about it, or come give me a hug, but there doesn't seem to be a feeling behind it. And what I notice in autistics is almost the opposite. They're not showing it, they're not displaying it, they're not saying the quote unquote right words, but they're feeling it. And sometimes those feelings might be delayed, maybe a day or 2 or a week until we cognitively and emotionally process it. But when it comes, it comes in leaps and bounds and huge waves. And like you said, some of the most profound, empathetic people I've met have been on the autism spectrum. Also, our logic and our tendency to think in categories and labeling and branches, and it limits itself to being able to come out with the right words right away. Wanting to jump to that logical solution instead of, oh, that must be really difficult, or that must have been really hard for you.
Or being stuck in feelings, so you can't articulate that because you're sort of...
Yes, or wanting to coming out of that need of, well, logically, this is what you can do and it'll be better, and it coming out rather feeling like it's void of emotions and very logical and robotic. But what the intention is, and I always go back to, what is the intention? What is the intention? And the intention is, well, I want to help you. I want to be there for you. And the way I do that might look different. It might look awkward. It might look strange. But my intention is, I want to be there, and I want to help you, and I want to listen. And just because I come across as not being able to do that in the typical way, or it takes me longer, or it's something that, you know, is different, doesn't mean that it should be judged or labeled a certain way.
I'm just going to read something you wrote because I did. So you wrote, I am convinced that being autistic is being human on the highest intensity, a human control mechanism turned to the utmost degree, almost to the point of lever breakage, almost to the point of lever explosion. It's being in a heightened state of awareness, reckoning, and problem solving. It's being the closest neighbour to the mind's very own reasoning. I really like that last line, and I wondered if you could talk a bit about that last line, but also the whole thing in terms of...
I'm going to ask, can you give me 1 minute? I'm going to ask my son to quiet down a little bit.
No worries.
Just 1 minute. Hey, I'm recording an interview, so can you not make any noise for a minute?
I'm sorry.
Unless it's urgent, just wait a few minutes, okay? Thanks, son. Okay. Sorry about that.
That's fine. Do you want me to
I forgot to tell him. I forgot to warn him. I usually warn him.
No worries. Would you like me to read it again? Or...
No, I think, I mean, for editing purposes, maybe that'd be easier for you.
Okay, cool. So you wrote, I am convinced that being autistic is being human on the highest intensity, a human control mechanism turned to the utmost degree, almost to the point of lever breakage, almost to the point of lever explosion. It's being in a heightened state of awareness, reckoning, and problem solving. It's being the closest neighbour to the mind's very own reasoning. And I really like that last line, and I thought perhaps you could expand on the last line, but also the whole thing about the other aspect of being on the spectrum very often is living in a physical system that is highly intense or highly shut down, but either way, it's a very intense state quite often.
So as most of us know, our senses are highly tuned, and some of us, if not all of us, have sensory and processing conditions that make life challenging, such as being able to only eat certain foods with certain textures and smells, or having to wear earplugs because of common noises like the refrigerator buzzing or the heater turning on and off, those types of things, and having to escape places that are extremely loud or have toxic smells, etc. But also, we're sensitive also to the way our bodies are in the environment and our spatial awareness, and there's specific terms for all of those senses as well, and the internal functioning of our bodies. So we're tuned in all ways, inside and out. But I also think, in my experience with talking to autistics, that we're also turned into ourselves, into our thinking process, and we have this profound self-awareness, as if we can naturally step back and watch ourselves in conversation and watch ourselves before, during, and after. And how is it going to look? How is it looking, and how did it look? And it isn't something that's learned or practiced. It just is. And that in itself is such a beautiful gift, but also extremely exhausting. Constantly being aware of not only your senses, but your thoughts and your movements and your behaviors. And then when you couple that with the shame or bullying or criticism we might have experienced, more than likely experienced growing up, and all those messages and all those rules of what we should do and shouldn't do, it becomes mind-boggling how much we are experiencing in just a minute. We're experiencing life to the highest degree, and some days, as most of us would attest, it's the most beautiful thing in the world, especially when we're tuned in to nature, animals, or a good friend, or a good book, or good music, good movie. I don't think it's a coincidence that most of us love to binge watch movies. We just get absorbed and sucked in to the creation of that art or that music. So those days are brilliant and masterful. But then we have those days where we are in that deep, dark pit of, that word that starts with H and two L's. And it doesn't feel like it's ever going to end. And we're experiencing that pain and that hurt at the same degree as we experience beauty and creation. And so that is the price I think autistics pay to be in this world, and what makes us have such unique insights and empathy, going back to empathy, that we can bring to a situation, because we really are experiencing life on the human spectrum, all parts of the human spectrum, as an autistic individual, and as are many other neurodivergents with similar profiles, such as those who experienced a lot of childhood trauma or post-traumatic stress syndrome, or even there's a lot of crossovers with dyslexia and the way autistics' minds work. And so there is this pain, but there's also this joy that many of philosophers have touched on, the pros and cons of those experiences in our lives as human beings.
And to draw that a little bit more, in your work you talk about a loss of self, of identity, and so on one hand you work, and people not having a self-protective layer, and you work to sort of strengthen that so that people can manage in the world. But also, as you're talking, and I really see that it's a really valuable human way of being, to be open and to be connected to other things, and it's a beautiful space. So it's not, again, it takes it quite out of the mode of fixing autism. But it's also, when you said at the beginning about it ends up being so many people have access to this state, in a sense, if you start defining it further than autism. I like to play around with the idea of that in terms of where we're working towards as a culture and a world culture, and how we evolve, because it seems to me that we have come to the very end of what an ego-based society will function with. And so that more collective experience and that collective consciousness is very much, I think, an autistic space. Mm-hmm. And there has always been people on the spectrum, but there does seem to be, whether they're coming out more or they just are more, it seems to be where we're going, in a sense, and moving out of survival of the fittest sort of mentality. So do you see neurodivergence being part of an evolving humanity? That's my final question.
I would not venture to say that I could guess upon that, or I don't think that there's one set of humanity that has been claimed by Mother Nature, or mutations to make us evolve. I think if we look back, that there's definitely promises and potentials in autistics to give new ways, innovative ways of thinking, and moving away from all that energy spent on materialism and social niceties, and that part of many people's life that absorbs the other creative energy. But I think there's a lot of other people who aren't autistic who have those same values and same goals. And there's other cultures. I think the first world cultures are actually more behind than a lot of other societies who already have these innate values in place, that family comes first, and treating the elderly well, and treating children well, and honoring people that are different. then the American culture in general, we're actually backwards in a lot of ways. So can autistics help evolve American culture? I would definitely say so. But to venture to say it's an evolution thing, I think everything can potentially be part of an evolution and a way that nature is bettering us as a people. But that just gets so complex. It depends on your views of spirituality, and your higher power, if you believe in a higher power, and the cultural aspects and the biological aspects, environmental aspects. So it's just such a huge, broad topic. We could probably talk about that for hours itself. And I can't really answer that in an eloquent, easy, precise format, except to say that I think autistics are evolving as autistics, that we are coming from a place of oppression and suppression of self, and oppression and suppression by others to ourselves, to a place of self-acceptance and recognizing that we do have much to offer, and that yes, it's hard, and yes, there are so many challenges, but there are millions of people around the world who have very similar brains and very similar challenges and very similar skills, and innovative and creative thinking that we can offer the world. So I would say we're evolving as autistic people. Whether or not it's a human evolution, I think that would be, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that it's just that.
I think what I mean more is that evolving culturally rather than it being a type. I don't
I think that any artist, philosopher, deep thinker, someone with high intelligence, perhaps someone who thinks outside of the box, that anyone that can be an outlier and be outside that norm is advancing culture. Yes. So we're not saying stagnant, and we're not stuck in our same patterns and same behaviors. So that in that sense, yes, because we are mostly all outliers, and we're also mostly all atypical. And so we are saying, hey, but what about this way? And what about this? Yes. And why don't we take a moment to pause and think about this? And we're actually we're the whys, but why? Yeah. My mom used to say, I just all the time as a child, why? We're the whys. When my son is now, he's about to turn 21. He is on the autism spectrum, Asperger's, and he's off at college doing brilliantly. And when he was about 2.5 years old, I believe, he's in the back of our minivan. This is before I knew that he was on the spectrum. And he just said, Mommy, who birthed God? And how do you know? And who birthed that person? So we have this innate curiosity that enables us to continually ask why. And when we're doing that, it naturally leads to people questioning it and, revisiting things. Maybe we need to change this. And my work at Ultra Testing, I'm the community well-being manager. I'm in charge of inclusion, diversity, and internal coaching and outreach to agencies around the country and outside the country. And at my work at Ultra Testing, which is a technology company, we hire software testers, I can see how that why has transformed our company into this place where everyone can strive. So looking at why are these procedures this way? Why are the policies this way? Why don't we have it this way? How can we include everyone? Why don't we do it? It's this constant looking outside of the box and offering a different perspective. And the key for that is that safety and that willingness to listen and that unconditional support. And so it kind of circles us back to why the support system is so important. So those whys can be answered. And so that culture can morph and change. And whether or not that's a family unit, which I know a lot of parents who raise autistic children see how much having an autistic child can benefit the family, learning not to care as much as what other people think, learning a new way of normal, learning new ways to support and love each other, getting through arguments, getting through conflict, advocating for your child, for yourself, can be such an empowering journey. So I don't even remember what I was saying, but the autistic journey itself, the whys, can just bring so much benefit to a system, whether it's a family unit or an organization or a community.
And as you were saying, it's required that in their infancy, for want of a better word, of growing into themselves, they're supported well and strengthened so so the world can have that beauty well. But in the meantime, we haven't had a good history of supporting people in that way and allowing them to blossom. Which is exactly
I would also say, you made me think of something, that there's this raw beauty, because some people, not all, but some people that aren't autistic, what they say is filtered through a lot of rules of what should I say so that that person hears me, that I'm pleasing them, that they're not mad at me, that they know I'm agreeing, that I don't offend them. And the truth gets muted because it's filtered through multiple filters of all these rules of how someone's supposed to be in the society so they can be accepted. And one of the gifts of autistics is it's almost channeling, because what we say for the most part is a truth. It's what we're feeling inside. It's what we're experiencing. It's what we really believe at that moment. Doesn't mean it can't change, but at that moment. And it's not tainted by what we want someone else to believe or hear or convince. It's just, that's what I've seen more than anything else, is this purity of that's all there is.
Yeah.
And I found in some of my relationship with people that aren't on the spectrum, especially like boyfriend, partner relationship, is even in my marriage, there's this questioning of, what are you trying to say? Or what's the hidden meaning? Or what are you trying to get at? And it's nothing. That's all there is. That there is no other hidden, there's nothing hidden.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about being around autistic people is you get what you get. There's no guessing. And it's so freeing. And one of the things I talk about, some of my close friends, and sometimes when I'm in small groups speaking, is that I visualize that everyone's carrying around a basket above their head, like a wicker basket. And it has all these things in it, fears and about what to say and how to say it and will they like me, and sometimes when I'm around people, their baskets feel so heavy to me and I get exhausted just being near them. But with a lot of autistics, their baskets just feel empty.
Yeah.
Despite their inner anxieties and challenges, it just doesn't seem like they're bringing their baggage with them. It's just them. And I don't have to live up to an expectation. I don't have to come across as a certain way. I know that they're not judging me from their own limited perspective. I know that they're looking at me in through eyes that understand that I'm multiple levels and a multiple being. And in this moment, I might be coming across one way, but in another moment, I might be coming across another. And it's just this acceptance of a human having a human experience that I rarely have with people that are not on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's been lovely. Thank you so much. It's really, really nice to talk to you. And
I hope I wasn't too long-winded.
Oh, no, it's lovely. It's so refreshing and beautiful, and it's a pleasure to listen to you. And I really wanted to interview you because I think it's really important that there's so many parents of people on the spectrum, and they're looking for something new. They're trying to understand a wider appreciation than often what they're given in more clinical settings, and we need to go past that. It's very important to start defining things. And if it's diffuse, it should be because it is. And so everything you said is just lovely. It's been a really, really nice conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to go back with your mentoring question and just say that in the future, I might pursue that as a vocation, a paid vocation, but it just didn't feel right in my heart at this time. Intuitively, it didn't feel right for a variety of different reasons. Stretching myself too short was one of them as well. But so there, I didn't mean to imply there's anything wrong with charging for counseling or mentoring, only that wasn't a fit for me at this moment. And I believe we should have more autistic mentors out there. And what a great vocation if someone could start that for themselves as an autistic man or woman who's had a lot of life experience and bring that to the community.
Yes, yeah, I think it's really, really important. Or maybe you'll have to start training people.
That was part of my plan. I had this huge plan of I was going to mentor. I was going to write a book about how to mentor. I was going to train people, build this huge mentoring autistic group. And then I realized I'm only one person. And just because I can do it doesn't mean I have to do it. And so it's back to that self-care and self-management and listening to that interior voice. And I'll know when it's the right time and trusting that. And I encourage everybody to take care of themselves first so that you can benefit others to the greatest of your capacity.
And I think what you do is inspire other people to be their best. So in that, they have the confidence to go and take those roles up as well. It isn't just one person leading the way. It's just not like that.
Thank you. And if I had to give advice to anybody out there who wanted to be a support to other autistics, it's to try and avoid giving advice or saying what to do, and just practice saying, I see you, I hear you, and I believe you. Because that's what autistics and all human beings need the most.
Yeah.
And it can be really tempting, and I'm guilty of it. Do this, try this. But so much of the time, there's so much healing from just knowing that someone understands and they believe you.
Yeah, people need to find their own way.
Mm-hmm. Follow their own inner guidance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for today. That's been really, really lovely.
It's been nice listening to your accent, your dialect.
Aussie. Hopefully I'll see you soon. I'll be in the States briefly in March, but not your way. So if I'm Seattle-based soon, I'll come find you.
Oh, please do tell me, and you're welcome to come and stay here. I have a spare room anytime, and I've had different people from around the world come stay here.
That's lovely.
Mostly from the United States. But you're more than welcome to. It'd be nice to meet you in person. And I'd like to talk more off the record, not now because I'm exhausted, but another time to learn more about how you are and how you're doing and things.
Yeah. No, I'd love to. We'll finish that now. But it would be great. I really enjoyed. I felt quite lost in what you were saying. It was really nice. So it was a good interview. I thought it was wonderful. Thank you.